All right, happy Friday. Hope everyone is doing well. I hope the pool is warm and you are listening to this as you are swimming against your rivals. Go Emily. Okay, so certainly post-World War II destruction seen from death camps as you watched on the screencast yesterday. I tried to really limit the number of pictures, not simply because I'm trying to hide it or limit your exposure, but you get the idea. You've had Holocaust reviews and studies, and you can even take a class on that and be depressed on a daily basis. But it certainly makes you a better human being by understanding these tragedies, as that's one of the reasons why we study it. So 1945 to 1980 is going to, of course, be the start of the Cold War. So even actually before the war ends, the big three, as they're known, the Soviet Union, the U.S., and the UK are going to meet in Iran, specifically Tehran. How innovative. But the whole idea there is they're planning the end of World War II. That's where I got mixed up with the Yalta. I apologize about that earlier. That's where they're going to plan the D-Day invasion in France. And again, you can see the three major powers here. You see Stalin, who's actually one of the worst dictators ever on the planet. Some historians actually credit him. I feel like the word credit means like you earn something. Some historians make Stalin responsible for up to 30 million deaths. Yet we look at Hitler, who's responsible for 11 million deaths, but we don't look at that way for Stalin. Any idea why that might be? Disclaimer, you are being recorded.
Because Hitler didn't more Stalin?
Hitler was probably more systematic. But anything about Stalin in particular? He's an allied power. He's on our side. So if you're on our side, that's okay. Go commit mass genocide. But really, I mean, Stalin, to some extent, could be responsible for 3 times as many deaths as Adolf Hitler. Yet, because he was sort of on our side, of course, history is written by the winners, you don't really see all that negative perceptions of him, but he was an awful human being. Nevertheless, this is where D-Day is going to be planned by opening up the second front in France, and again, planning for the end of the war. So you see that the big three are already coming together, and we'll see a series of conferences as we go through the notes today. The Yalta Plan, which we just discussed about, or the Yalta Conference, again, the big three meet, and the whole idea is that they're trying to see, what do we do with Germany? Stalin originally wants to punish Germany and wants to hit them hard with reparations, but we know the consequences, and this is a good example of synthesis, where compare this to World War I, where we want to hit them hard with reparations because, you know, they started this war, you have destruction. But again, it's probably not the best idea because when you have lots of debt, and you know that tends to fuel extremist leaders, extremist parties such as the Nazi Party. So as a result, Stalin will compromise in terms of not wanting to punish Germany as hard. He's also going to be open to free elections, this idea of self-determination. If you have the idea of self-determination, it just means a country can choose to do what it wants. It's free to do what it wants. So for example, if you're a self-determined individual, you do what you want. You have that right. No one's telling you what to do. And again, here's another picture of the three, from FDR to Churchill to Stalin. Of course, FDR will meet his demise relatively soon. Our third major conference, same circus, different clowns. With respect to Churchill won't be there, Attlee will, and FDR will have passed at this point, so you have Truman here. Now Stalin actually reneges on his promise for free elections. He's going to establish what are known as satellite states, and that's where the Soviet Union is going to have control over these countries. It's going to have a lot of influence. So when you hear about satellite states, think about, like, you know how like a satellite is sort of remote from the location? So think of, like, for example, the Ukraine will be a satellite state. Poland will be a satellite state. They're not directly in the Soviet Union, but they're essentially have the same government. They have a lot of influence from the Soviet Union. And he's, again, going to renege from free elections. Germany also will be divided into 4 occupational zones. So you're literally carving out 4 zones within Germany, and that will, of course, be from the U.S., the U.K., France, and the Soviet Union. Which aspect do you think is going to be the most problematic of those 4 zones? Which, you know how we just said that Germany is going to be divided into 4? Which zone is going to be the most problematic? Yeah, the Soviet Union, right? Because again, what's really interesting too is if you think about it, 1920s, you have the first Red Scare. The United States is very much afraid of communism, and then we sort of have this shotgun marriage with Stalin. And now it's sort of ending, and we're now fearing communism once again. So interesting how those things happen. Now, this is oversimplified for you, and this is probably insulting your intelligence to some extent. But when you look at the difference between capitalism versus communism, right? The people are producing the goods, they are choosing what to produce, and the people are in charge of producing that and in charge of purchasing it. Whereas with communism, the government is controlling every aspect of the economy. So that's, of course, the major difference. And the fear that, again, communism is going to spread and that this is the worst thing. If you look at some of the cartoons that come out from the Cold War, as well as even media and films, a lot of it can be traced back to the Cold War. Anyone a fan of the Rocky movies? You are? Have you seen this one? Is this the first one or the fourth one or the third one? The first one? Fourth. Okay, yeah. I mean, this is a classic Soviet Union versus this all-American. And again, sort of highlighting the picture between the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, this battle. You're not just battling ideologically in terms of trying. Let me back that up. You're not just fighting in terms of like an arms race, but you're also fighting ideologically, whether it's sporting events, whether it's science with the launch of Sputnik. You're going to see how this war, which really doesn't equate to any physical violence, is going to play out in many different realms, even when it comes to sporting events such as the Olympics. Anyone ever see that? I think it's called Miracle on Ice. Is that what it is? It's that hockey movie between the Soviet Union and the United States hockey team. Miracle on Ice, I think it's called. I feel like that sounds like a Disney
It's just Miracle.
Oh, just Miracle. Oh, okay, there you go. And then here's a classic one here of Kennedy wrestling on an atomic bomb. So at this point, these are the satellite states that you see here from Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, East Germany. Notice it's divided, as well as Poland. So the Soviet Union is the USSR. It's no longer Russia at this point. And then here, of course, you see the Soviet Union's bloc within Germany. Okay, so that's going to set us up for our later notes with respect to the Cold War. Now, you might be wondering what happens in terms of punishing the remaining villains of World War II. Well, in Germany, you're going to have 24 of the worst surviving Nazis being sentenced, 12 of which are going to be sentenced to death, others to life terms. You do have a number of Nazis who flee to Argentina. Some of them had actually been later captured. But what is interesting is that they are tried in an international court, which still exists today. Some do criticize the Nuremberg trials for not going far enough, not prosecuting enough people. Others criticize it for saying that they didn't really have a fair trial in the sense that they were going to automatically be found guilty, so that's also been a criticism. Others say that there weren't enough people. Like, what would you do, hypothetically, the man who drove the train who's transporting all of the, let's say, Jews to a death camp? Is that guy responsible for all those deaths? Should he be sentenced to prison? Because if he didn't drive the train, certainly he would meet his own demise. So there's a lot of complicated and sticky issues that come out of the Nuremberg trials. But again, it will occur, and they are basically, most of them are found guilty. With respect to Japan, you do also have about 2,400 trials, resulting in about 5,600 people going to jail or even being executed. Interestingly enough, the Emperor Hirohito is actually spared. One reason he's going to be spared is he's actually semi-divine. He's the descendant of a supposed goddess. So that's one reason they don't actually try him for war crimes or execute him. Also, too, General MacArthur is worried about Japan turning communist. So they feel that if they took their leader and executed him or sentenced him to prison, perhaps this would sway the Japanese closer to communism. And that's the whole goal here, that the United States wants to prevent communism from spreading. Because communism is this big, evil concept that all Americans and Allied powers are very much fearful of. So nevertheless, MacArthur is going to be in charge in terms of its occupation and transitioning Japan into a more democratic state, and he's very much responsible for Japan transitioning after World War II to the democratic state that it is today. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? All right, so this is going to set us up for the Cold War as a result of World War II ending. Good luck, Emily, with your swimming endeavors, and please don't drown.